The charge of the Rohirrim that saved Minas Tirith was not a simple act of alliance. It was the final, bloody payment on a sacred debt sworn 500 years earlier, a promise made on a haunted hill over the grave of a long-dead king. This is the story of how an entire kingdom, the green heartland of an empire, was given away not for power or for wealth, but out of sheer, world-ending desperation. It is a tale of a debt that could only be paid in blood. The year is 2510 of the Third Age. Gondor is dying. The line of the kings has failed long ago, and the kingdom is ruled by the stewards from the White Tower. Their dominion has receded, their armies are thinned, and their ancient fortresses stand empty along borders they can no longer patrol. For centuries, the realm has been bled by plague, civil war, and the unending attrition of conflict with the servants of the shadow. And now, a new enemy rises from the east. They are the Balchoth, a savage confederation of easterling tribes, more numerous and more cruel than any that had come before. They are not a disciplined army, but a migrating horde. A flood of men, women, and children in great wagons, driving all before them, devouring the land and leaving nothing but ash in their wake. They do not fight for conquest. They fight for annihilation. Whispers from the shadows of Mirkwood claim this horde is not acting alone. They are driven by a will far darker, a malevolent power that has taken root in the fortress of Dol Guldur. This is the will of the necromancer, the will of Sauron. In Minas Tirith, the steward Sirion faces the abyss. The Balchoth have overrun the plains of Rovanion, destroying the last of Gondor's northern allies. They have crossed the great river Anduin on crude rafts and have poured into the northern province of Pelennor. That vast, green land, once the pride of Gondor, is now almost entirely depopulated, its people having fled or perished in the Great Plague centuries before. It is an open wound in Gondor's flank. Sirion's southern armies are pinned down, fighting the corsairs of Umbar. His northern army is a shadow of its former strength, outnumbered 10-1. They are utterly alone. The steward summons his council, but there is no hope in their words. The elves have withdrawn from the world. The dwarves are locked in their mountain halls, caring little for the wars of men. The northern kingdom of Arnor is a ghost, a memory of a time long past. There is no one to call. No help is coming. But what if a message could reach a people forgotten by the south? What if a plea for aid could cross 600 miles of a land now swarming with enemies? And even if it did, why would a reclusive tribe of horsemen from the far north risk everything for a dying kingdom they had never even known? In the depths of Gondor's archives, Sirion finds a desperate sliver of hope. The lore speaks of the Eotheod, the horse people, who dwell in the upper vales of the Anduin, far to the north, beyond the darkness of Mirkwood. They are descendants of the same Northmen who had once been allies of Gondor in ages past. They are fierce, proud, and loyal, but they are also hundreds of leagues away, separated by a sea of enemies. To send a message is a suicide mission. Yet, to do nothing is to guarantee the utter destruction of his kingdom. Sirion makes his choice. He prepares two things: a summons for aid and the red arrow. This small black-feathered dart, its tip painted red, is a symbol of the gravest peril, used only when Gondor itself faces imminent ruin. It is a call for an all-or-nothing response. He chooses 6 of his swiftest and bravest riders for the impossible journey, bidding them ride in pairs. Their path is not the open road, for all roads are watched. They must ride through shadow and secret ways, trusting in speed and stealth. Their mission is not merely to deliver a message, it is to outrun the death of a nation. The journey is a nightmare. One by one, the messengers are picked off. One pair is caught by an orc patrol in the bleak hills of the Emin Muril. Another vanishes without a trace near the Brownlands. The third pair is ambushed as they approach the shadows of Dol Guldur, a place of unspeakable evil. One rider is slain, but his companion, Borondir, the strongest of them all, breaks free. He rides on, alone. For days he endures, haunted by the terrors of that dark forest, his horse near collapse, his own spirit stretched to the breaking point. He is a man driven by a single, desperate purpose. He carries the last hope of the West in his satchel. He cannot fail. After 15 days of relentless flight, having covered nearly 500 miles, he emerges from the gloom, and at last beholds the wide, windswept plains of the Eotheod. Here live the Horse Lords, a people of the north, tall and fair-haired, lovers of horses and the open plains. They are a remnant of a nobler age, when the world was younger. Their leader is Eorl, called the Young, for he had become lord of his people at only 16 years of age and still possessed the fire of his youth, though he was now a seasoned man of 45. He was a king in all but name, commanding the absolute loyalty of his 7,000 riders. Into this hall stumbles the lone rider from the south. Boromdir is a specter of a man, gray with exhaustion, his clothes in tatters. He walks to the foot of Eorl's high seat, and with the last of his strength, he pulls the red arrow from his satchel and presents it to the Lord of the Eotheod. He speaks Sirion's message. Gondor is in peril. The west is falling. Aid is sought. Then, his duty done, the brave messenger collapses. A great silence falls over the hall, and Eorl the Young looks at the arrow, a summons from a half-forgotten world of stone cities and fading glory. He summons his council. The wisest of his chieftains argue against the plea. Gondor is too far. The journey south is a fool's errand, a ride into a trap from which none would return. They spoke with reason. The lands of the south are a death trap, one warns. The Balchoth are as numberless as the blades of grass on the plains. We would be throwing our people into a fire we cannot quench, another adds. And who will guard our homes? While we ride south, the orcs of the misty mountains and the dragons from the northern wastes will descend upon our women and children. Their fears were just. To ride south was to march an entire nation to a war they had no part in, for a kingdom that was nothing more than a legend to them. It was a gamble that risked their very existence on the word of a single, desperate messenger. Eorl looked beyond his worried council, beyond the safety of his own great hall. He was a man who understood the weight of old tales and the pull of ancient kinship. But this was not a tale. It was a summons from a dying world, and the price of answering it would be the blood of his entire people. He held the red arrow aloft, its crimson tip seeming to drink the firelight. Then he stood, and a hush fell over the hall as every eye turned to him. His decision would not just save a city, it would forge an empire. When has a foe of that magnitude ever remained content with one conquest? Eorl's voice, low and resonant, cut through the council's worried murmurs. He did not shout. He did not need to. He looked at each of them in turn. You speak of the Balchoth, but is that the true name of the fear that has crept into our own lands? Is it orc raids that make the shadows of Mirkwood lengthen and reach for our homes? Or is it something else? He paused, letting the question hang in the air, heavy and cold. Boromdir rode from the south, Eorl continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But he rode through the shadow of Dol Guldur. That is where his companions were lost. Not to simple Easterlings, but to the darkness that dwells there. A darkness we have all felt growing. A will, a guiding hand that gives the orcs courage, and the Balchoth, a hate beyond their nature. This was the shocking rehook. This wasn't about saving a distant ally. It was about confronting an enemy that was already on their doorstep. The Balchoth were not the disease. They were the symptom. The Steward of Gondor asks for aid against an army of men, Eorl declared, his voice rising now with cold fire. But I tell you, the true enemy is the necromancer of Dol Guldur, who uses these men as his claws. If Gondor falls, that shadow will not stop at its borders. It will creep north. It will swallow the Anduin. And one day, it will be our halls that burn, our children who are taken. We will not be asked for aid then, for there will be no one left to ask. He raised the red arrow high. We do not ride to save Gondor from its fate. We ride to save ourselves from ours. To meet this darkness in the field, while we still have allies to stand with. His decision was made. There would be no more debate. This was not a plea for help. It was a declaration of war against the great enemy itself. For 7 days, the land of the Eotheod was a whirlwind of preparation. Horns echoed from the hills as riders were summoned from every corner of their domain. Smiths, hammers rang day and night, mending mail and sharpening blades. The air thrummed with the nervous energy of a nation preparing to march to its potential doom. Eorl did not take a small, swift force. He knew this was a war for survival. He gathered the entire host of the Eotheod, the full might of his people, 7,000 riders in the prime of their lives, and with them, a herd of spare mounts, for their charge had to be relentless. He would leave only a few hundred warriors behind, boys and old men, to guard the folk. It was the greatest gamble in their history. You will ride with the vanguard, Eorl told him. It was not a question. Watch, learn, but above all, fight. If I fall, our people must still have a leader. Brego simply nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and fierce pride. This was his first great riding. He gave the command, and the great host moved. It was not the slow, grinding march of a Gondorian army of foot soldiers. It was a thunderous wave of flesh and steel, a flowing river of horses that poured south. They rode without banners, in silence. A gray host under a gray sky, their passage marked only by the trembling of the earth. They bypassed the eaves of Mirkwood, giving the dark fortress of Dol Guldur a wide berth. Yet, its presence was felt. A fell wind, cold and unnatural, blew from the east, carrying with it a sense of despair. Whispers seemed to travel on that wind, promises of defeat and death. Some of the younger riders faltered, their horses shying away from unseen terrors. But Eorl and his veterans rode on, their faces set, their wills like iron. They were men of the north, and they would not be cowed by shadows and foul airs. For 6 days they rode, covering a distance that would have taken a marching army a month. They ate in the saddle, slept in brief watches, and drove their horses to the very limit of their endurance. Finally, on the 15th day since Borundir had first set out from Minas Tirith, they crested the final rise of the Wold and looked down upon the northern plains of Gondor. The field of Celebrant. What they saw stopped the heart. The intelligence from Sirion was disastrously out of date. The situation was far worse than the messenger could have known. The Gondorian army of the north was not besieged. It was broken, scattered. A desperate last stand was being made on the west side of the river, their backs to the Anduin, but they were cut off, surrounded, and being annihilated. To the east, a second, even larger enemy force had crossed the great river Anduin and was now swinging around to crush the Gondorians from the rear. It was a perfectly executed trap. Sirion's army was caught between a hammer and an anvil, with no hope of retreat and no chance of victory. They were watching the complete destruction of Gondor's northern flank. Eorl's chieftains gathered around him, their faces pale. "We are too late," one breathed. "There is nothing to be done. We cannot fight such a host," another said. "It is a trap. They knew we were coming." But Eorl did not hear them. He saw only one thing. The enemy's attention was entirely focused south, on the dying remnants of Sirion's army. Their northern flank, where the host of the Eotheod now stood, was completely, impossibly exposed. The enemy had no idea they were there. A slow, grim smile touched Eorl's lips. This was not a moment for despair. This was a moment for the horse lords. He turned to his hornbearer. His voice was not a shout, but a command that cut through the wind and the distant screams of battle. "Sound the charge!" The sound acted like a key in a lock. The great horn of his people sang out, a single, clear, devastating note that rang across the wold. 7,000 spears were lowered as one. The ground began to shake, a low rumble growing into a deafening roar as the host of the Eotheod surged down the grassy slopes like an avalanche. But as they thundered down, a cold dread touched Eorl's heart. This trap was too perfect, too precise for a simple barbarian horde. How had they known exactly where to cross the Anduin? Who had coordinated this flawless pincer movement? Was this truly the work of men alone? Or was the foul wind from Dol Guldur merely the herald of its master? His thought was cut short by the impact. It was not a battle. It was a reaping. The first rank of the Balchoth horde, so focused on the slaughter before them, did not even have time to turn before the wave of horses and steel smashed into them. The shock was absolute. A cataclysm of shattered bone and torn flesh. The Eotheod battle cry, held in check for so long, now erupted from 7,000 throats. A sound of vengeance and northern fury that drowned out the screams of the dying. Eorl and Felaroth were a white fire in the heart of the chaos. His sword Guthwine rose and fell, a blur of silver light. He fought not with the wild rage of his men, but with a cold, focused lethality, his eyes scanning constantly, seeking the black-robed figures he had glimpsed from the ridge. The enemy, caught completely by surprise, their command structure shattered in the first moments of the charge, broke into 1,000 panicked fragments. The trappers had become the trapped, pinned between the fury of the Rohirrim and the uncrossable Anduin. The surviving Gondorians, hearing the horns of an unexpected deliverance, found a last reserve of strength. With a great cry of "Gondor!" they surged forward, a final, desperate push to meet their saviors in the middle. The Balchoth and orcs, now beset on two sides, dissolved into a panicked rout. Many were cut down as they ran. Others threw themselves into the great river and were drowned. The slaughter was terrible, but swift. As dusk settled over the field of carnage, two figures met amidst the slain. Eorl the young, tall and golden-haired, dismounted from his great stallion. Before him stood Sirion, Steward of Gondor, his armor dented and his hair gray, but his bearing still noble. He looked at the young northern lord, not as a superior, but as an equal. "You came," Sirion said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and gratitude. "In our darkest hour, you came." Eorl simply inclined his head. "You sent for aid." "We came." Sirion looked north, across the green, empty plains of Pelennor, now scoured clean of the enemy. "This victory will not last," he said. "The shadow in the east is growing again. Gondor cannot hold these northern lands alone." He turned back to Eorl, a momentous decision in his eyes. "Gold and silver are a poor reward for saving a kingdom. I offer you a greater gift. This land, all of Pelennor, from the Anduin to the Isen, to be your own, a home for your people, forever." Weeks later they stood atop the high, wooded hill of Halathirion, a sacred place where the long-lost tomb of Elendil was said to lie hidden. Below them, the lands of Pelennor stretched to the horizon, a promise of a new beginning. There, Sirion, in the name of the kings of Gondor, and Eorl, in the name of his people, swore an oath. "This oath shall stand in memory of the glory of the land of the star, and of the faith of Elendil the faithful, to be sworn by none but the heirs of Elendil and the heirs of Eorl. From this day forth, the land of Pelennor shall be given to Eorl and his people, to be known henceforth as Rohan, the mark of the riders. Hear now, all peoples, the oath of Eorl. Foe of Gondor shall be foe of ours. Our swords shall be drawn whenever their need is greatest. This I swear for myself and my people, and may the shadow take us if we fail." A new kingdom was born, and an alliance was forged, not in a council chamber but in blood, fire, and unbreakable faith. The Oath of Eorl was but one thread in a tapestry of ages, an echo of promises made in the elder days. To witness the forging of every legend, the fall of every kingdom, and the enduring hope that rises from the ashes, subscribe to the _Silmarillion Chronicles.